project of democracy was a speculative venture from the beginning, and it kind of demands engagement. And if you're not engaged, then the whole thing goes away, and that's where we are now. You know, if it's broken, then the right instinct is to want to lean in and fix it. Uh, and it is broken, but don't walk away from it. That would be tragic. I always say democracy is an ongoing fight between hope and cynicism. And right now the cynics are on the march. So we need the purveyors of hope to march as well.
Indeed.
Well, that's the perfect intro to the Sanity podcast with Alisyn Camerota and Dave Briggs. Thanks so much for joining us. And we're so excited to be joined by our old friend, David Axelrod. He, of course, senior advisor to President Obama. He was the founding director of the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, where Dave's daughter goes, and CNN contributor of many things. David, so great to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see both of you. Great to be with you.
We've been really looking forward to talking to you because let's just talk about the breaking news of the century, which is that all of the top Trump national security officials, defense secretary, secretary of state, et cetera, were using the Signal app, which is encrypted but not secure, and not using any of the government apparatus to communicate war plans against the Houthis. And so, from a political standpoint, this is the moment, it seems, that Democrats should really seize on this and talk about how much more competent and adult and capable they are. Do you think that Democrats will do that? What would you have the Democrats do today?
Well, I'm not sure actually that I agree that is the argument that people should be, that Democrats should be making, because I don't know that by dint of the incompetence of the Trump administration that Democrats will win the case that somehow they are competent. I think there's jaundice about government generally. Here's the thing, and I don't want to impugn our friends over at Fox, but if you prize as your first qualifications and your only qualifications for appointing people personal loyalty and ability to perform on television, then it makes perfect sense to recruit the Secretary of Defense off the couch of the weekend edition of Fox and Friends and say, yeah, why don't you run the Pentagon, the largest and most complex and most meaningful bureaucracy in the world. And that's what happened. And it was, I think, predictable that the wheels were going to fall off at some point. I mean, no one who's been involved in government, Republican or Democrat, understands how this could even happen. That A, they could be having these discussions on Signal, that B, that they accidentally read a report into, which I'm actually grateful for, because if Jeff Goldberg hadn't been on there, we wouldn't even know. And they'd still be having meetings on Signal, and you'd still have Steve Witkoff on a cell phone in Moscow, probably the single least secure place in the world, participating. And yes, I think people are going to begin to say, man, it would be good to have some people who know something about what they're doing and aren't just there because they, are willing to kiss the president's ass. But it's concerning about what else. Is it public health? Is it disasters? Is it aviation? Where are the next snafus going to come? Because I think they're almost certainly going to come.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, obviously, there's nothing that can actually imbue us with confidence with this team. I mean, the Signal thing is a huge embarrassment and a huge danger, but that was just Monday, that's just one day.
No, you said, this is the story of the century for today. How they've handled it is symptomatic of something. The denial that any classified information was on there, then the information surfaces. So rather than saying, what went wrong here and how do we fix it so it doesn't happen again? The thrust seems to be, uh, how do we make believe that it didn't matter?
And your point is well taken. It was deny, it was deflect, it was discredit the source, which they certainly
Yeah,
attempted to do,
Jeff
Jeffrey
Goldberg.
Goldberg and the Atlantic. And then the question becomes, how do you reach, as the founding director of the Institute of Politics, how do you reach that 50% of the country that doesn't understand how big a deal this is, that used to chant, lock her up, to Hillary Clinton for having a private server in her home?
Well, I'm not sure that 50% is the 50%, and I'm not sure it's 50% either. There's probably a third of the country who's deeply
Fair.
embedded in that. And let's face it, they're getting, um, they, we live in an environment in which you choose your sources of information, and they're generally, a lot of people choose the sources of information that affirm their point of view rather than always inform their point of view. The president's making this odd argument, says, well, the operation came off well, and thank God that it did. Thank God that Americans didn't lose their lives and that there wasn't a catastrophe. The point is, the chance of a catastrophe was much higher because of the carelessness. And this is so the right answer is, let us learn from this and make sure that it doesn't happen again. He's not the only politician. I mean, he's conspicuous for his unwillingness to acknowledge error, but he's not the only one. I remember I thought it was a terrible mistake, and Alisyn, you and I may have had this conversation on the air at one point, but when President Biden refused to acknowledge that the exit from Afghanistan was less than optimal, that was a terrible mistake. I mean, people have eyes. They can see. They're not stupid. So just acknowledge the fact. I always shared the story of President Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs, which was a disaster, abortive invasion of Cuba in the beginning of his administration. And he stood up at a press conference and he said, victory has 1,000 fathers. Defeat is an orphan. Well, I'm the responsible officer of government here. And you know what? His approval rating went up 5 points because people said that's what leaders do. They take responsibility.
Not sure they're
On this,
capable
but I
of
just want to say
that.
one more thing. Alisyn, you said, about Democrats' incompetence and so on. We live in this time of great skepticism, and Democrats are going to have to earn the support of people, not just by criticizing Trump, but by presenting their ideas about how to move forward. One favor that Trump is doing here is, uh, for better or worse, and there'll be a little of both, this is going to be a teardown in many ways by the time he's done, and you're going to have to rebuild something better in many different aspects of government. And it's a chance to ask the question, how should we achieve the goals and ideals that we uh, think are so important in a new era, with new tools, with limited resources? How do we deliver on the promises that we make to people? And I think Democrats should be focused on that, talking.
Yeah, I take your point, David. I think that that's a really good point, that saying, hey, we're more competent than the Keystone Cops is not like a
Exactly.
great selling point. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
and I get it. But,
Yes.
David, I'm
And
sure you've heard all of the kind of lament of, where are the Democrats? Why aren't they seizing on these things? Who's going to emerge? Why are they sitting on their hands? How do you see it? I mean, do you think that Democrats should be more active right now, or is this such a time of disorientation that they're still getting their footing?
well, part of the problem here is that this president is starting so many fires, it's hard to know where to put your hose. And while you're watching the trees burn, it's really, really hard to step back and describe what's happening to the forest. So, all of this is challenging. And I do, I thought I'm not part of the Schumer pile-on about not shutting the government down, because I think he was right that would have handed Trump um, both a propaganda tool, but also a set of authorities that would actually have accelerated the dismantlement of government. But he could not have done it in the worst possible way. But I'm not piling on him on that. But what I am dismayed by is I saw him go on TV. I saw his interview with Lulu Garcia Navarro, uh, and he said that she said, "Well, why are people so disillusioned with Democrats? What happened? Why aren't the working people responding when you consider yourself the party of working people?" And he said, we always cared about the working people. He said, and we did a lot of great things for them, but they just didn't know about it. And, it turns out there's this thing, social media, and we didn't do it. We didn't do that very well. But now I've got some of my young members like Cory Booker and Tina Smith, and they're teaching us how to use social media, and we're going to do a lot better. And so really the answer was, we're fine. We just haven't told people how good we are. And that, the fact of the matter is that there is an enormous amount of anxiety in this country among working people who are some working 2 and 3 jobs to keep their heads above water. Rents are high. Housing is in short supply. We've seen the effects of inflation, and we've seen 40 years in which globalization, automation, a financial crisis, a pandemic have taken its greatest toll on working families in this country. So the system's not working well for large numbers of people. And we have to ask ourselves why and what do we need to do to fix that, and understand that there's a great deal of jaundice. It's not just that Democrats haven't communicated laudable things they've done, it's that the lives of people have not changed in a way that makes them feel more secure about their futures.
And David, the numbers are staggering. Something we talked about earlier here. Democrats are at 29%. That's an all-time low in a CNN poll. Conversely, the number of Americans that say we are on the right track is at a 20-year high, 44%. And Trump is at an all-time high, 47%. Democrats are turning to a young, fresh face, an 83-year-old Bernie Sanders. Do they need a messenger? Do they need a leader to turn things around?
Yeah, and leaders will emerge, and there are a lot of young people, younger leaders in the Democratic Party. I had a conversation earlier this week with Jason Crow from Colorado, a former military guy, who's quite impressive.
Yes.
I did a podcast a few months ago with Marie Glusenkamp Perez, who's a congresswoman from Washington, who's she and her husband run an an auto repair shop, and she's very rooted in her community and very, in a sense, nonpartisan in that she goes there to talk about issues through the eyes of the lives that her constituents are leading. But there are a ton of Mallory McMorrow, who's a state senator from Michigan, was on my Hacks on Tap podcast yesterday. Really smart, young leader who's willing to see things through a different lens. I can go on and on. Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan. There are a ton of them. As for Bernie Sanders, one thing you have to say about Bernie is he has an audience in part because he's spoken to some of the things that I've talked about, the enormous influence of money in politics and how it's influenced public policy. And I think that's a huge issue. But he's also said the same things for 50 years. And nobody ever doubts his authenticity. Nobody doubts that he's saying what he believes. And I think the bullshit meter is very, very sensitive now. And people are looking for leaders who are authentic and are willing to speak, and not just speak, but listen, speak and listen to people about their problems, and concerns and respond authentically to them. But I don't despair. Listen, I've got a few more. To the extent I have hair, I have a few more gray hairs than you guys, and and I've lived through a lot of periods in which both parties have lost, and full panic sets in. Frankly, when we won in 2008, there were a lot of Republicans who said, we may this could be our Armageddon. We may be destroyed, and now we are where we are now. And these things run in cycles, but it does take new leaders with a new perspective who are willing to speak authentically and think differently about how to solve the challenges of today. And I would say to Democrats, do not be the party of the status quo. Do not make the case that we just need to restore what we had. What we had is is what led people to choose a very imperfect alternative in 2024. And so, this has to be about real, authentic change, constructive reform instead of the nihilism that we see with the Musk and the Musketeers and all of that. But there's some real thinking to be done, and there are people who are doing it.
Um, it's so remarkable, David, that I don't have any gray hair. I don't know how to explain it.
No.
No, I don't. And it's truly miraculous. But David, you brought up
I choose to believe what I believe, Alisyn. So I don't want to be
I,
disillusioned.
yeah, no, my hair has turned quite gold with worry. But as Oscar Wilde would say. But in any event, David, you brought up 2008. If this is too personal a question, tell me to bug off. Do you talk to President Obama about this, about what's happening right now, and
I
does
have
he have
not
any
talked.
suggestions?
I've not talked to him. I've not talked to him in some time, to be honest with you. And I love him, and we shared a great journey together. But um, he has a different life now, and on occasion we get together and we chat, but not that often. And I don't intrude on his world, and he doesn't intrude on mine.
Is that to say he's not engaged with the party today?
I'm sure he's talking to some people. I'm sure
Mm,
people are seeking his counsel. I'm sure that's
yeah.
true. I'm sure listen, I know him well enough to know that he thinks deeply about these issues. I last spoke to him a couple of months ago, and he was thinking, a lot about the bridging the divide and how a deeply diverse country finds community again. I haven't talked to him since the siege of Trump, and I probably will sometime soon.
Yeah.
But why do you ask?
Because I think that there are some Democrats who say, we need help. Where are our leaders? And people hold up President Obama as the last kind of charismatic, hopeful person or at least somebody that they really felt that kind of magic about. And so I think that there's a feeling that it would be good to hear from him more.
Hmm. Well, look, he will speak when I think there's always the tension of what his role actually should be. I mean, before Trump came along, most former presidents have discreetly have maintained a discreet silence out of deference to the current president's right to conduct business as they see fit. You know, the whole model has been blown up, so obviously that may not apply here. And the president was pretty active in the campaign and had quite a bit to say. I don't know what his thinking is right now or when he'll resurface again, but I'm sure that he is thinking about it. But I want to, your point about the party needs its leaders to step up. I think what he would say if he was here was um, the party needs new leaders to step up. The party is always, when the party was lost at sea in the late 80s, Bill Clinton stepped up after 2004. And in that period, 2004 to 2008, Barack Obama emerged. There will be leaders who will emerge here. And there are plenty of people out there, and some of whom are obviously going to be candidates in 2028 who I think uh, could play that role. I mean, we could disinter Franklin Roosevelt, I guess, and try and
For a
you
fourth
know,
term.
yeah, yes, for a fifth actually it would be,
Oh, okay.
but I think uh, we need to generate new leaders. And by the way, one of the things that happened in uh, in 2024 is that the lead among young people. Now, Trump likes to say he won young people by 36 points. Um, as often happens, he's exaggerating a little because he lost them by 8. So it's a
An
delta
exaggeration.
of 42. But nonetheless, Biden had won young people by more than 20 points in 2020, and so that's concerning. And so it would be good for the party if younger leaders emerged who are more authentically connected. One, I got to tell you this thing. I think about it all the time. When Barack Obama was thinking about running for president in late 2006, one of the things that he said was to us was, you know, I am literally a couple of years from when I paid off my last student loan. I am just a few years from when I was struggling to uh, pay my mortgage and my other bills. Uh, I know that as time goes on, those things are going to fade in memory, and I'm going to be a different person. I'm not going to have that same sense of connection. And so I think it's a good time to run for president. There are a lot of people saying, marinate in the Senate for a decade and then run. And we need people whose experience is closer to the ground more recently to emerge and address not just younger people, but the problems that people are living today, and not just because you read about them, but because you've experienced them.
That's such a good point.
I do think that Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania went to the Barack Obama School of at least public speaking, if not leadership, and we
Yeah,
might hear
he
that name
probably.
again.
I have to say, I think he's an enormously promising guy, and he's smart and he's talented. But he should have taken about one or two less of those lessons. I think he may have overshot the runway in terms of the Obama oratory thing. When they start calling you Baruch Obama, you know that you've probably gone too far. But
Wow, that's
but
interesting. Yeah.
but he is a very, very. I think as I think about the candidates who might emerge in 2028, he's certainly near the top of the list of people who you think, yeah, that's a guy who might be able to do this. He has to win re-election first, and the people of Pennsylvania have to decide whether they want to reelect him
But
and whether they'll give him
the
a hall pass to run for president. But
Mhm.
um,
right.
but I think he's a very talented guy.
The young male vote was astounding in the split. It was a 23-point margin that Trump won men 18 to 25, which really was a decided factor in this election. But there's the issues, there's the leadership, and then there's the math, David, and no one knows this math better than you. The math is shifting dramatically in Republicans' favor. Texas, Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, Utah gain
It's about
seats.
electoral
California,
math.
New York, Illinois, Minnesota, Oregon, Rhode Island lose seats. How do you fight the math?
Well, look, that math changes from election to election. The thing that should be worrisome to Democrats is that it used to be that for Democrats, the larger the electorate, the better they do. Now, in the last few cycles, the larger the electorate, the better the Republicans did. Some of that is going to shift because, uh, you know, you talked about the numbers, Dave. Yes, Donald Trump is at an all-time high in popularity, and which is less than a majority. Okay, he is not a popular figure. He is more popular than he was, but he was the least popular president in history. So the bar was low. I'm not discounting. He has a steady 47% approval rating. We'll see what happens. One of the things that I think I'm wondering, so basically, let me finish the math question, and then I'll get back to something else. But I think that, these numbers can bounce around. Where independent voters go can bounce around. He's not very popular with them. Incumbents rarely are. The thing with young men is a serious thing, and that's something Democrats have to ponder. I'm doing an event at the University of Chicago next week with Scott Galloway, who's done a lot of work and a lot of speaking about young men. And I'm interested in talking to him about that and about this disconnect and the fact that young men have become far more conservative and more identifying with Trump and the Republican uh, Party. But, I don't, I think what worries me trend wise is that the Democratic Party has become a kind of metropolitan party. So you have these blue islands on a sea of red, and you can actually win presidential elections uh, that way. Um, a lot of these states have become non-competitive. That impacts on your ability to govern. It's hard to win large majorities in the Congress that way. So, the answer is do not give up on small towns and rural areas. Have a more authentic connection to the working people that you say that you're fighting for and that you think that you're fighting for. Don't approach working people like anthropologists and missionaries and show up and say, we're here to help you become more like us. Here's one thing I want to tell you guys. Um, Waste, fraud, and abuse and efficiency are words that are always going to poll well and always are going to be appealing at 20,000 feet. But when you get closer to the ground and people realize that, hey, what they're calling waste, fraud, and abuse is my Social Security office. What they're calling waste, fraud, and abuse were the people who are running this veterans uh, mental health center. What they're calling waste and abuse are things that matter in my life. $880 billion in Medicaid cuts are called for in this Republican budget framework that they're going to work on now. But once you put that kind of number out there, you're not just cutting fat, you're cutting muscle, you're cutting bone, and people are going to feel it in their lives. And so, Donald Trump, it could be that everything will work out and he will deliver the golden age that he
Mm.
projects. But for people who are living in what's supposed to be their golden age and others, if you in any way rely on the things that uh, that you count on government to do, uh, this will be an age that you may be eager to leave. But you do
Yeah.
get the feeling these days that what's happened is that we've seen a sort of Trojan horse of populism rolled into Washington with a kind of kleptocracy inside. And that when people discover that, they're going to be pissed.
um, and Elon Musk popped out of the Trojan horse and said, "Ha." Um,
Yes.
so, David, we'll let you go, but we like to end our podcast with a dose of sanity, and we ask our
Yeah. I
guests.
noticed your called sanity is a great concept these days. Much in
Thank you.
demand.
We feel it's in demand, and we were thinking about spelling it with two N's, but we realized that that was a bridge too far to point out what we're trying to counter. So, in any event, what do you do to stay sane? What is your dose of sanity? If it's daily, weekly, whatever you do.
Well, two things. First of all, I just spent a week on vacation with my kids and my grandkids, and it was ideal. It was idyllic. It was a tonic. Just wasn't long enough. But it's a cliche, but family means a lot to me. And it's baseball season. I'm down here in Arizona right now. I've hit 9 spring training games. There's nothing more sublime to me than sitting with family or friends at the ballpark. And while I'm not super hopeful about my teams, I just love being at the ballpark. That's another thing that I do. So I'm happy that spring is here.
Are you a Cubs fan?
Well, here's the deal, guys. I'm from New York City originally, and I moved to Chicago to go to the University of Chicago. And as a New Yorker, I have no choice but to hate the Yankees. But when I came to Chicago, I didn't have to have these tribal preferences. So I have seasons tickets on both sides of town. I root for both teams. It's not always easy. The White Sox had the worst record in history since the 63 Mets, which was the 62 Mets, which was the first team I ever was rooted for.
So it's you.
So,
Go on.
but
Yeah.
yes, but I am, but so I root for the Chicago teams. And, but I just love the game. My father was an immigrant and he came to the US, and I think he learned how to play baseball before he learned how to speak English, and he ended up being an all-city pitcher in New York, and he got a college scholarship. And every weekend when I was a kid, we were at the ballpark. And so when I go to the ballpark with my kids and now my grandkids, um, there really is sort of a link that I feel, something special that connects them and me to my dad, who they never knew. So it's magical. I I love the game. I'll tell you this: when I draw my last breath, as much as I love my work, I'm not going to say, "Gee, I wish I had done one more Situation Room," or "I wish I had done one more podcast." It's not going to be about that. So, yeah, try and keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I
Great
totally agree.
reminder.
Yes, that's a great reminder. And that's the beauty of age, is that you get to make some of those decisions more. You get to decide your time if you've played your cards right. Well, so
Well,
Yeah.
go do that. And we appreciate the time you spent here with
Okay.
us. It's been
It's a
great,
pleasure to
David.
be with you guys. Hope to see
hey,
you again.
thanks. Thanks
Okay,
so
take care
much.
now.
David, really great to
Bye.
see you.